If you watched my series on how to write prose, then you know that I have a strange obsession with deconstructing stories, a practice that I call redlining. Redlining in art is an educational tool where you highlight the line work of an art piece in red to get a better idea of how it was constructed. I cannot stress this enough. This kind of redlining is good. This kind of redlining is bad. Don't do this kind of redlining. No, bad. Drop the pen, drop it, drop it. Steve, go to jail. No one likes you. My love of learning runs deep, and I honestly believe that redlining is the superior way to learn about how masterful stories are made. And if I love it so much, that must mean you love it too, right? Right? Well, the verdict is in, and I don't care. So, hello, Internet. Welcome to Book Theory, the show that has way less pop cultural drawl than MatPat's deep dives into games, food, and movies, but makes up for it in the friends we made along the way. I'm just kidding. I'm not calling it Book Theory. Welcome instead to the Red Line. Spanning 32 years on television with 706 episodes, the longest-running American sitcom, animated series, and primetime television series has to be doing something right, don't you think? Today we're going to take a look at one of the most popular episodes of The Simpsons to see how it was made. Written by Conan O'Brien, directed by Jim Reardon, Homer Goes to College is a well-loved story that is often at the top of the list for every diehard Simpsons fan. When choosing an episode, I wanted to pick what could be considered the best of the best. Over the years, The Simpsons has seen the heights and the valleys of popularity, with wild swings in either direction. Regardless of how people might feel about The Simpsons at any given point in time, it is abundantly clear that they've done something right to be able to keep this show on the air for so long. When you redline a story, you want to make sure you're redlining a great story. The quality of your source material matters, because if you redline a poorly told story, then you're only learning about bad storytelling habits. You have to learn the right things so that you can practice the right things. And when you can't learn directly from the masters of storytelling, you can learn from their writing using redlining. If you're ready to learn from the masters of writing, then sit tight, because things are about to get a little bit jaundiced, actually. To redline a story effectively, we're going to look at three categories of storytelling: plot, structure, and prose. Plot will tell us what happens in the story, the unique quality of the ideas, and how logical the story's action is within the setting. That's the foundation of the story. Structure will give us insight into the pacing and how the story arranged the major plot points along the timeline. That's the framework of the story. Prose is the artistic value of the writing. It's the decoration of the story. For a script, the decoration happens mostly in dialogue. Now, I found a transcript with quotes and scene summary from simpsonsarchive.com that I'm going to use to redline the story. There's a link in the description to the script I used if you want to check it out. I copied the script from simpsonsarchive.com into Google Docs, and I'll be using highlights and comments to deconstruct the story. Let's start with the plot. The idea of the story is basically a non-traditional student returning to college to save his job. Where the story marks itself as unique is in the fact that the main character goes to school expecting partying and pranks, but finds people who actually want to study, refuse alcohol, and enjoy their classes. All of the problems at school actually come from Homer's unrealistic expectation of what college life should be like. Once he gets there, he forgets his true goal of saving his job and replaces that goal with experiencing the college life he missed out on in his youth. Logic and action in the story is a bit more complicated, since The Simpsons is essentially farce. Logic doesn't exactly come into play, but we can at least judge how each ridiculous action leads to the next. In this case, Homer stays true to himself even to the end of the story. He thinks college is about partying. He gets that idea from college party movies, and all of his actions are based on that same misconception. Even in the end of the story, when Marge tells him he has to go back and do it the right way, he is still under the mistaken impression that he should be partying in college. The thought process and motivation are extremely consistent in this story, even forgoing the traditional story element of a character being changed by their adventure in the end, to great comedic effect. Plot is closely linked with structure, so to pull out the most important plot elements of the story, I have to identify the components of story structure. So let's knock both of these things out together. There are some telling things about the structure used for this story. It's easy to identify the hero's journey plot archetype used. Life as usual happens with everyone sleeping inside the nuclear power plant, even as a meltdown is happening courtesy of Homer and subsequently averted by a dog. The inciting incident comes in the form of a test by the Nuclear Regulatory Committee, which Homer fails spectacularly. Burns refuses the call to adventure by trying to bribe the inspectors, but they're insistent that Homer needs college-level training in nuclear physics for his job. Homer accepts the call to adventure when Burns brings him the news. He never got to have a normal college experience, and doing it now will save his job. Afterward, he has to face 3 threshold guardians: the college application, the essay, and choosing a photo of himself. He experiences his first failure, getting rejected, and Burns has to come up with a new plan. Since he holds a chair on the school board, he uses his influence to get Homer accepted. Homer enters a new world on the school campus. The rules are different from what he'd come to expect of college based on the movies he watched, but he denies those differences and surges heedlessly forward. This causes him to struggle with the new culture he finds himself in when he tries to show his teacher how nuclear fission works, and somehow manages to melt down his classroom in a nuclear accident, which forces him to regroup and accept tutoring. He adapts quickly to the tutoring, becoming close friends with the nerds assigned to help him, and drags them into his unrealistic expectation of college life, achieving what he thinks he wants, a normal college experience. However, this victory comes with an unexpected cost. Homer gets himself and his new friends expelled for a botched prank with a school mascot. Realizing his new friends can't function in the real world, he invites them to live with him to make up for the wrong he's caused them. This is his first step toward returning to righteousness. Homer realizes that he can't just run away from the mistakes that hurt his friends. He regroups to try and attack the protagonist one final time by planning another prank where the nerds will save the life of the dean to get back into school. But the prank goes wrong, and Homer accidentally hits the dean with his car. In the hospital, Homer returns to righteousness by admitting that everything was his fault. The dean forgives him and allows Homer and the nerds to return to school just in time for Homer to enter the lair of the antagonist, his final exam for Nuclear Physics 101, which he hasn't studied for. He enters the final battle with the antagonist when he studies, or tries to study, all night leading up to the final test, which he promptly fails. Homer thinks all is lost and he'll lose his job, but then the nerds provide a rescue from without by hacking into the school computer and manually changing Homer's grade. At home, Homer talks about the lessons he learned, suggesting that he's changed as a person because of his college experience, to which his children assure him that he has not changed at all. Wrapping up loose ends, Marge tells him he has to go back to college and do it properly, and Homer reasserts that he still believes college is all about partying. The structure here is really interesting. Now keep in mind that scripts are actually timed a little differently than books, and I wasn't able to see the original script or watch the episode because I don't have access to them. My analysis of the structure here might be a bit off, but here's what I could piece together based on the transcript I found at Simpsons Archive. If you've watched my previous videos about plotting a story, you know that I like to use a 3-act structure with a quarter of the story in Act 1, half the story in Act 2 and a quarter of the story in Act 3. The way that The Simpsons structured the script is also in a 3-act format, but they placed a third of the story in Act 1, a third in Act 2, and the final third for Act 3. Why is it so different? Well, I actually thought about that all day. I agonized over it, and then I came to a realization. An episode of The Simpsons is a short story. I'm usually concerned with writing novels, which take a great deal of time to tell. The pacing of a long-form story needs to be different than you would find in a television show. I've always struggled with writing short stories, and I think this is why. Short stories just aren't written the same way that books are written. Mind blown. Not only is the structure of the pacing different, but I also found that the threshold guardians for The Simpsons were placed before Homer entered the new world of college life. Normally, I would place my threshold guardians after my main character entered the new world as part of his struggle with the world. However, this isn't the first time I've seen threshold guardians used this way. Piers Anthony, author of a series of books set in the world of Xanth, uses this same structure in his stories. It's a perfectly legitimate structure to use, and it reads really well in a comedy or farce. So let's visualize this. These are all the plot elements involved in a hero's journey. Here, we have the narrative pieces that correspond to those plot elements. And this is where they end up on the plotline. These are the bones of how you write an episode of The Simpsons. But this isn't all there is to it. The last thing I want to look at is prose. As I mentioned before, scripts place more of the prose in dialogue. How that prose is written depends more on the style of the story. Let's see how The Simpsons uses their dialogue to enhance their storytelling. I've watched The Simpsons for years, so some of what I'm about to tell you about the dialogue isn't much of a surprise. On the line level, The Simpsons uses short, simple sentence structure. The language used depends mostly on the character speaking. Mr. Burns uses more formal, grammatically correct language. Blue-collar, less educated characters use simpler words, less grammatically correct sentences, and a lot of verbalizations for lack of intelligence. Words like duh. The way dialogue is used is to overemphasize character archetypes. A dumb person can't just be a little slow. He has to be excessively stupid. An evil rich guy can't just be evil. He has to be super evil. In this way, line in the story is used to create quintessential archetypes. It's very allegorical characterization that works extremely well in comedy and farce because it's exaggerated to the point that no one would recognize the absurdity of a character's actions in this story as real life. This gives them the freedom to use irreverent and really punchy humor in the story. The value of The Simpsons is also really interesting. The writers use abrupt changes in value to emphasize sudden slapstick jokes or moments of extremely dark humor. At one point, the mood of the story is extremely light, only to be followed up with a joke about there not being enough material for a children's hospital because Homer stole it. Occasionally, jokes are punctuated through ever-darkening value as the mood gets just a bit worse with each following action. The majority of the story remains fairly light on the value scale with 3 key moments of excessive darkness. The inciting incident, the moment when Homer realizes his small victory came at a cost, and in the final battle with the antagonist when all hope seems lost. So what does all of this mean for you? Here are a few of my key takeaways. 1. Use a 3-act structure and the hero's journey plot type to drive your action forward. 2. Try to find a ridiculous twist on a common story type as the foundation. 3. Use caricatures and overemphasized character archetypes as your cast. 4. Play with story value to shock your audience and make your jokes a bit more punchy. 5. Use absurdism and farce with a fair amount of social irreverence as the basis for your jokes. And 6. Keep the overall value of your story light, except in the major plot elements that are meant to motivate your characters into action. If you follow the pattern set by one of the most well-loved Simpsons episodes of all time, you can easily start practicing to make your own Simpsons-style story. Keep writing, keep practicing, and until next time, follow the red line. Do you want to know what I was looking for when redlining for prose? Check out the video on top where I start out my series on how to write pretty. Otherwise, click on the bottom video to see what YouTube recommends. As always, thank you so much for joining me today on CC Writes. I hope you enjoyed our time together, and I will see you later.